Well, there's no better setting than this beautiful winter Sunday as we begin a month-long focus on generosity to reflect on abundant life. Maybe you're thinking, oh brother, abundance, this is going to be woo-woo. Maybe you've heard preachers on TV talk about going after abundance and getting all the money that God has set aside just for you. They fly in private jets to preach to the poor and middle-class people, that those poor and middle-class people can get rich by giving money to their ministries. That's not at all what I'm talking about today. I think of abundance differently. And there's a whole school of theology that I'll tap into in the sermon this morning. Life springs up all around us, often having nothing to do with our work or our worthiness. This is just the way the world works, abundance of life. Saguaro reach down into the earth and stretch up toward the sky. Birds wing their way from rooftop to rooftop. Snakes and bugs and lizards and rabbits skitter along the surface and burrow underneath. The earth itself sings the irrepressible song of life to those with ears to hear. When we live in a world like this one, why would we give in to the fear that there's not enough? Why would we accept the myth of scarcity? The authors of the Christian Gospels ask this question in the form of a miracle story. Of course, for those of us who lean more humanist, even humanist Christian, the miracle isn't really the point. Jesus had just heard the news that his friend John the Baptist had died. And Jesus, being human, needed to be by himself for a while, I imagine, to mourn his friend. So he made his way, as the story goes, to the shore of a lake for some quiet. But no such luck. He was spotted. And before long, there was a crowd pressing in on him, begging for healing of their illnesses. Jesus had compassion on them. But the way the story goes in the Gospels is interesting. Jesus doesn't start doing the Benny Hinn thing and touching people and knocking them over and saying they're healed. He spends time with them. He talks to them, listens to their stories. And after a while, Jesus' disciples, those start to get worried. It's getting dark. And they say to Jesus, these people are hungry, and we're way out in the country with nothing to feed them. Send them away. Stop talking to them. Stop listening to them. Send them away so that they can get something to eat. And Jesus, probably not all that helpful, he just said, you feed them supper. And so, sort of off go the disciples into the crowd, and they scrounge around for food for a few minutes. They hadn't turned up much at all. They said, look, Jesus, we just checked, and all we found was one kid with a loaf of bread, and 5 loaves of bread, rather, and a couple of fish. And Jesus sat the people down in groups and took the loaves of bread and fish, and he blessed them, and he sort of ceremonially broke them and gave them to the disciples to distribute. And when everyone in the crowd, as the story goes, had eaten as much as they wanted, and the disciples had gathered up the leftovers, there were 12 baskets, a symbol, one full basket for each of the 12 tribes of Israel. As Bible scholar Walter Brueggemann wrote, Jesus demonstrated that the world is filled with abundance and freighted with generosity. And hear the political nature of this story. Brueggemann says, if bread is broken and shared, there is enough for us all. Jesus is engaged in the sacramental, subversive reordering of public reality. End quote. In other words, this miracle story speaks to economics. The story is calling us to think about what we do with what we have, what we do with what we feel might be too little. When they're shared, blessings multiply in their power to satisfy. There is always enough if we have eyes to see it and hearts to make sure that all get their share. That is the abundant story. I don't use that language, abundance, all that often, although I'm starting to. Because as I alluded to earlier, in the religious world especially, the word abundance has been abused by these slimy TV evangelists who are trying to make a buck off the poor people in their congregations. If you just pray hard enough, they say, and donate $10 a month to their ministry, God will make you as rich as they are. Garbage, in my humble opinion. And it's not just the religious world. Plenty of people want you to claim your abundance by buying into their scheme. They are, of course, rich because of all the donations or purchases from people hoping to be rich. They talk about abundance, but they've actually created a scarcity mindset in their followers, leading them to think that God or the world only has so much good stuff, and they'll only get some of the good stuff if they behave the right way. One of these jokers a few years ago told his congregation that God told him they needed to buy him a private jet. I tried that at our last board meeting. It didn't. It seemed like a hard no. What I mean when I talk about abundance is living life with the assumption that you are enough and that there's enough in the world for both you and everyone else, and then working to make that a reality. But sometimes the scarcity story wraps its tentacles around us and pulls us back from celebrating life's abundance. It whispers, "Can you ever really have enough?" You know its voice. It insinuates that there's only so much good stuff in the world, whatever the good stuff you're seeking is, and if you don't fight for yours, and when you have it, protect it, someone else will get it. It's hard to celebrate anyone else's successes in that mindset because that means that's one less success that's available to you. Why can't you be successful like that? The scarcity voice asks. You're not enough. There's not enough to go around. When we become convinced of scarcity, we become materialists, identifying our very selves with the possessions we've cobbled together. We become consumers by identity, competitive for resources, hoarding money and stuff as if our lives depend on it. On a larger scale, scarcity thinking leads us to decimate animal populations, to burn the rainforest, to provide us with goods that can be attained another way, or even better in many cases, not obtained at all. Scarcity thinking can make otherwise good people heartless and cruel. The immigration discussion in our country seems to be centered on how to protect our stuff from some imagined enemy. The sacrament of this scarcity religion is a giant wall across our southern border. But without the fueling myth of scarcity, an anti-migrant stance is nonsense. If we believed we had enough, if we knew we had enough to share, what difference would it make if more people were moving here to be a part of our abundance? We could address crime via law enforcement rather than turning our police officers and sheriff's deputies into immigration officers. We could welcome with open arms our sisters and brothers from other nations, whether they were fleeing governmental persecution or coming here as our ancestors did to raise families. Would it be complicated? Yeah. Would it cost us something? Absolutely. But starting with the idea that we have plenty, rather than that we have to protect what's ours, would make a lot of difference. Another quote from Brueggemann: "The scarcity story ends in despair. It gives us a present tense of anxiety, fear, greed, and brutality. It produces child and spouse abuse, indifference to the poor, the buildup of armaments, divisions between people, and environmental racism. It tells us not to care about anyone but ourselves. And it is the prevailing creed," Brueggemann says, "of American society." He continues, "Wouldn't it be wonderful if liberal and conservative church people who love to quarrel with each other came to a realization that the real issue confronting us is whether the news of God's or the earth's or the universe's abundance can be trusted in the face of the story of scarcity? What we know in the secret recesses of our hearts is that the story of scarcity is a tale of death. There is a more excellent bread than crass materialism, he says. It is the bread of life, and you don't have to bake it. We must decide where our trust is placed. End quote. There is, in our time and in our hearts, a great struggle between these two stories, scarcity and abundance. Each of them wants to hold us in its sway. Unitarian Universalism has long taken a position on the side of abundance, although not perfectly by any means. We are the products of a loving, generous God of many names, of a rich and miraculous process of evolution. We ourselves, in all our diversity, are evidence of the abundance at the heart of all creation. She who has given us birth will reliably hold us in her care all through our lives, and at the end of our journeys, we share a common destiny. We will all return to the great love which has given us birth. We are kin. We're in this together. But it seems like in our state, with the legislators back at the Capitol, scarcity has taken hold. It's political. Some are saying we'll be better off when everybody's looking out for their own interests. So loosen the reins, deregulate, take away the social responsibility to care for the vulnerable. Here in Arizona, that's meant raiding the general fund. We've taken money from public schools, from programs that benefit the homeless and the poor, all the while offering tax breaks to corporations and the wealthy and upper middle class. To quote Brueggemann again, the great contradiction is that we have more and more money and less generosity, less and less public money for the needy, less charity for the neighbor, end quote. These budget wranglings are moral issues, and often they stink of scarcity thinking, hoarding of wealth, shuffling public funds into fewer and fewer private hands, while the poorest among us are increasingly underserved. We people of faith need to be voices of abundance thinking in this conversation. Our faith is more than just private spirituality. It's about creating the world we describe in our principles, the world that Unitarian Universalism has described for generations. So I say we need a new conversation in our congregations and in our culture, and we need it now. A conversation that begins with the acknowledgement that there is enough for all of us. Enough money, enough time, enough justice, enough rights, enough for everyone. No more talk of not enough money for homeless shelters and public schools when we're giving tax breaks with our other hand. And then knowing there's enough, what do we owe one another? With the resources that we share, what do we owe one another? Do we, as a society, owe our children an education? Do we owe one another health care? Do we have a right to life? Let our belief in the abundance of goodness be our guide. As one Hebrew scholar has said, it has nothing to do with being Republicans or Democrats, liberals or conservatives, socialists or capitalists. It's much more elemental. The creation is infused with generosity, and we can find practices, procedures, and institutions that allow that generosity to work. End quote. We who have enough have the responsibility of working to make sure that our loved ones experience the abundance of the world as well. This is, of course, why spirituality and religion can never be completely outside the realm of the political. Because when we're following the principles we say we espouse, we must go out into the world and take care of our neighbor, take care of one another. And that will always mean working with elected officials and one another to make sure we're doing that as a society, not just in individual cases. So there's some work involved in acting out a belief in abundance, but there's a wonderful byproduct too. Wonderful especially in the context of our hyper-capitalist, super-fast world. When we have faith in the abundance of life itself, I think we can really rest. Life's abundance doesn't require nonstop work. Now, it may mean not having the latest model car or the biggest house in the neighborhood, but it's true that even when it comes in the form of help from our neighbors or fellow congregants, we can almost always rely on the abundance of life itself. Rest is possible when we know there's enough. So friends, I hope we can remember that all that we need is present. It's here. Because we've often bought into the scarcity mentality. Some don't have access, and we have to work to change that. But we didn't create this abundance. It was here when we got here, and we don't own it. It's ours to share. There is enough. You are enough. May it be so. Amen.